The forest was dense, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. A thick mist clung to the ground, and the silence was profound, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Alice snapped photos as she wandered deeper, her boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves, her lens capturing the eerie beauty of the place. But the deeper she ventured, the more unsettled she became. It felt as if the very woods were alive, watching her, responding to her presence. The wind, which had been rustling through the trees, suddenly died. There was no breeze, no movement in the branches. The silence grew oppressive, thick and suffocating. Alice stopped in her tracks, a shiver crawling up her spine. The temperature dropped drastically in the span of a few seconds. She could see her breath in the air, a fog that seemed unnatural, too dense for this time of year. Then, as if the forest had parted for her, Alice saw her. A figure stood in the clearing ahead, bathed in pale moonlight. She was tall, impossibly beautiful, with long, raven black hair that flowed like a living thing around her shoulders. Her skin was deathly white, smooth and flawless, and her lips were a deep, rich red, the color of blood. But it was her eyes that caught Alice's attention, crimson, glowing with an otherworldly light, gleaming like freshly spilled blood. They seemed to pierce straight into her soul, unblinking, unrelenting. Alice's heart skipped a beat. The woman was stunning, terrifying. And in that moment, Alice realized the stories were true. The vampire queen had been waiting for her. The queen's lips parted, revealing the sharp, gleaming fangs that marked her as something far beyond human. "Alice," she said, her voice a silken whisper that carried on the wind like a velvet caress. "I've been waiting for you." Alice's legs trembled, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to run, to scream, but something about the queen's presence froze her in place, rooted to the ground as though she had no control over her body. The queen took a slow step forward, her movements graceful, predatory. "You've come seeking answers," the queen continued, her voice lilting, almost playful. "But some questions are better left unanswered. I am not a tale to be told in whispers, Alice. I am the truth that will consume you." Alice struggled to find her voice, her mind reeling with 1,000 questions. Was this really happening? Was she dreaming again? Or had she somehow stumbled into the heart of something far darker than she could have imagined? I don't understand," Alice stammered, her throat dry, her voice trembling. Who are you?" The queen smiled, a smile that was both beautiful and chilling. "I am your queen, Alice, the ruler of this place, the mistress of all that you see before you. Ravencroft is mine, and so are you. In time, you will come to understand the truth of it all." Her words were hypnotic, pulling Alice deeper into the queen's gaze. It felt like the queen was reaching into her very soul, reading her thoughts, pulling at her deepest fears and desires. Alice could feel her heart pounding, the weight of something ancient and eternal pressing down on her chest. "You belong to me now," the queen continued, her voice a soft promise. "Ravencroft is mine, and so are you." Alice shook her head, a bolt of panic seizing her. "No, that's not possible. I don't belong to anyone." The queen's smile never wavered. She stepped closer, until the air between them was electric with tension. Alice could smell her, something rich and intoxicating, like honey and blood. It made her head spin, her senses overwhelmed by the proximity of this creature. "You think you have a choice," the queen murmured, her voice low, almost a purr. "But you don't. The moment you stepped foot in Ravencroft, you became mine. I've been watching you, Alice. I know what lies beneath your skin. The hunger inside you, the darkness that calls to me." Alice's heart raced. She felt it, the pull, the hunger, like an itch beneath her skin, the desire to give in. It was like the queen had unlocked something inside of her, something primal and ancient. Her body, her mind, seemed to betray her, craving the queen's power, her presence. No, Alice gasped, fighting against the rising tide of desire. This is madness. The queen's laughter was soft, melodic, but laced with something cruel. Madness. No, Alice. This is destiny. You were always meant to find me. And now that you have, you can never leave. Ravencroft will keep you, just as it has kept me. Forever. Alice stumbled backward, desperate to break free from the pull of the queen's gaze. She turned and fled into the woods, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath ragged. But the sound of the queen's voice followed her, echoing in her mind, as though it was no longer bound by the limitations of the physical world. Run, Alice, the queen's voice whispered, the words a promise of what was to come. But know this, you can never escape me. I am the darkness that waits for you. I am your fate. Alice didn't stop running. Her legs burned, her breath came in ragged gasps, but she couldn't stop. She had to get away, had to distance herself from the queen's unnatural presence. The woods stretched endlessly before her, a labyrinth of trees and shadows. The moon hung high above, casting eerie beams of light through the canopy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stumbled back into the town, breathless and disoriented. She found herself standing in the middle of the silent streets, the fog swirling around her like a shroud. The town was still, as though nothing had happened, as though the encounter in the woods had been nothing more than a figment of her imagination. But Alice knew better. She wasn't safe. Ravencroft was no longer just a place. It was a prison, and the queen was no longer just a legend. She was real, and Alice was hers. The first encounter with the vampire queen had left Alice shaken, terrified, and helpless. She had seen the queen's true power, the inescapable force that drew her in like a moth to a flame. Now, Alice would have to confront the darkness that had claimed Ravencroft, and with it, her own fate. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the truth that awaited her, or if there was even a way to escape it. Alice's heart hammered in her chest as she ran, her legs burning with the effort to flee. The forest stretched endlessly before her, its branches tangled like twisted hands reaching for her. The cold night air bit at her skin, but the chill that truly consumed her was the one crawling up her spine, as if someone, was following, watching, waiting. The vampire queen's voice echoed in her mind, a low, seductive whisper that threatened to unravel her sanity. You cannot escape me, Alice. I have already marked you. The words rattled through her thoughts, a relentless chant that reverberated with an icy finality. Her mind screamed for her to stop, to turn back, but her body refused to obey. The sensation of the queen's gaze still burned through her, as if invisible tendrils of power were wrapping around her limbs, pulling her deeper into the heart of Ravencroft's dark curse. I have to get away. I have to escape. The thought repeated in her mind like a lifeline, but the weight of the queen's influence clung to her like a suffocating fog. Every step she took felt like wading through molasses. The forest had become a labyrinth, and the path she once thought was clear now twisted and coiled in ways she couldn't understand. She could feel the queen's presence in the distance, an oppressive force, watching her, waiting for the inevitable moment when she would fall, when her will would break and she would return, just as the queen had promised. Alice stumbled, her breath ragged, and looked behind her. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, eerie shadows, but there was no sign of the queen. Is she gone? Alice dared to hope, but even as she did, a dark dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She could feel it. The air had shifted, become thicker, colder. The silence of the forest, once unsettling, was now deafening, as if every creature had gone still in fear of the queen's wrath. A sound shattered the quiet, soft, like the rustling of silk, and before Alice could react, the figure appeared before her. The vampire queen. She stood effortlessly in the clearing, her figure bathed in moonlight, as if she had always been there, waiting for Alice to come to her. Her dark eyes gleamed with hunger, but there was something more, something ancient, something that felt like the weight of eternity pressing down on Alice's chest. Her lips curled into a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. Alice's breath caught in her throat as she froze, her instinct screaming for her to run, but her legs refused to move. She could not escape. She had no strength left to resist. The queen stepped forward, her presence like a crushing weight, suffocating Alice. The coldness of her touch was immediate, but it wasn't just her skin, it was a coldness that radiated from within, like the very essence of death itself. "You will serve me, Alice," the queen whispered, her voice soft as velvet, but heavy with command. "I can see the darkness inside you, the part of you that longs to be free, to break away from your mortal bonds. You are not so different from me, Alice. I was once like you, lost, searching for something more. But now, you belong to me."